at the beginning of 2017, there's only $6 million in Tether. At the end of 2017, I believe it's $1.7 billion.
Whoa!
And this is where people are like, oh, it's fake.
Well, Phil, thank you so much for coming to the Bitcoin Rails podcast. This is such a treat. Phil Potter, founder of Tether. Is that how you identify?
No.
No? Co-founder? No.
I'm certainly founder of Tether, but I've done, a lot of things. So, but
fair.
But I guess in the zeitgeist, I think that seems to resonate with other people. But
it's a special title.
There's there are many claimants to being a Tether founder.
I've read this.
But I do think it's fair to say that I am the original progenitor.
Was it, I mean, how did the idea of stablecoins even come up for you originally? And maybe we should back up, actually, before you answer that question. How did you get into Bitcoin?
Well, I've been, on Wall Street for almost 20 years prior to that. So I'm old. So I'll be 54 in May. But since 94, I've been on Wall Street in various capacities, but I was a fintech entrepreneur from around 2000 forward. So I was one of the very early progenitors of high-frequency trading technology. So I built trade execution platforms and ticker plants and risk systems and trading front ends and things like that. And I've held roles that vary from CEO, CTO, CFO, I'm a CFA charter holder. So I did a lot of stuff like that. I had a front row seat to the flash crash. I had, and did a lot of, we did a lot of proprietary trading, serviced a lot of sort of high frequency hedge funds.
A lot of things that did not exist in early Bitcoin when I'm sure you were first introduced to it.
Well, that was the idea that so what we had found is in the HFT space, it had grown extremely competitive. There were these big shops out of Chicago that were pouring tens of millions of dollars a year into CapEx to get that extra microsecond of in their algorithmic trading. And I was just a small shop and, on a relative basis, and I just didn't have the capacity to keep up with that. And, we had some really good years in the financial crisis. I mean, it was like, manna from heaven. But
there was money to be made.
If you were positioned, if you had the tools and you had the edge, the technological edge, but it just grew very, very competitive. And so I'd merged my company with a larger offshore concern in 2012, and mostly to kind of remove myself as kind of a key man, and I was really looking to get out of my partnership, and I wanted to do something different. And, so it was a guy who worked for me, one of my floor techs, who kind of introduced Bitcoin. He's like, Phil, this seems like it'd be really up your alley. You should check it out.
When was this about?
What's that?
When was this about?
We're talking about late summer, fall of maybe 2012.
Okay.
And I'd heard about Bitcoin before. A close friend of mine sent me an email in early 2011 about this. He's like, Phil, this looks like something to be really up your alley. And
why do you think they said that?
Well, I'm a technologist, and I would consider myself an intellectual, I guess, and it was to be something that was, there's something a bit mind-bending about it, and futuristic. I'm a big reader of science fiction, and it was just for people who knew me, they would say, well, if anyone's going to find any sort of diamond into the rough on fake internet money, it's going to be Phil, so.
Okay.
But a friend of mine did send me an email about it back in 2011. And I wrote back to him saying, it looks like a scam to me. And he saved the email, printed it out, and framed it, many years later.
I hope you have it up on your wall in your office. Yeah.
It's in a box somewhere right now, but I've been moving around. But so that. And then when it was introduced to me kind of later, I had I think my wife had 2 small children at the time. I had grandmas for the weekend, and literally had like one of those stereotypical weekends where I downloaded the white paper, sat there, with a glass of scotch, and started to read it, and then reread it, and then found myself on like Bitcoin Talk and Reddit and just like reading and listening.
Were you gripped by it, or was it like, oh, I guess I should learn about this?
I was just really intrigued, I think would be the best way to describe it. It just, as somebody with a computer science background, I think the thing that was most striking to me was that someone had effectively solved the Byzantine general problem. And I thought that was the most interesting part. I mean, I wasn't thinking about Bitcoin as an instrument, right? And I have an interesting story about Bitcoin as an asset in those early days, but it was the idea that found a way to effectively create digital scarcity, right? Which was a problem that plagued, let's say, the recording industry. Right,
Yeah.
like Napster, would create all kinds of problems.
So it was the technical innovation, like just the idea of this technical innovation that was interesting.
That's what I saw it as. I had no opinion on the value of the asset Bitcoin, but as I got sort of down the rabbit hole, as I guess the overused adage goes, I then, felt it was important to try to buy some. And boy, buying Bitcoin back then was like, really felt like you were doing a drug deal.
Yeah.
And even though people were using Bitcoin to buy drugs, and like buying Bitcoin was like buying drugs. I
like
think it was
shady corners, cash only.
Local Bitcoins, meet up with someone, then, or I remember doing it with like Charlie Shrem's like BitInstant, trying to get money. It's like, oh no, you go and deposit money at this bank account, and you have to deposit exactly this amount so I know it's you.
Oh my God.
And I'm like, wow, this is some arcane shit,
Oh my
and
gosh.
I was like, so.
Did that make you more intrigued, or did that turn you off?
Well, it certainly made me hesitant about putting a lot of money to work, but I would say that in the beginning, it was just like, I just wanted to experiment, and then what I realized is that, okay, so I got some money over at Mt. Gox and I bought some Bitcoin, and then I withdrew the Bitcoin. I'm like, what do I do with this? All right. There's all these other exchanges.
You withdrew it, you mean like to your own wallet, or like you took it off of Mt. Gox?
Well, no, off of Mt. Gox to Bitstamp or BTC or
these old exchanges, basically.
Other exchanges, right? And I was, and I would start trading Bitcoin. Now I bought my first Bitcoin at like $5, right? And I promptly sold it at 12. Bought it back at 17. Promptly sold it at 35. I'm like, I'm doubling my money every time. I'm like,
I'm crushing this trade.
Yeah, crushing this trade. And then I was just kind of on some online forums. I got involved in a IRC chat channel with a lot of like
which one?
Bitcoin Assets.
Ooh.
That was run by Mircea Popescu, who since passed away, but he was quite the character and certainly an impresario in the early days of Bitcoin. And, we'd struck up a friendship, and I became progressively more comfortable kind of putting some more money to work in Bitcoin. And then it became clear to me that winter. I mean, I used to play this card game, this poker game, Erik Voorhees and Charlie Shrem and Yifu Gu, who did
this was a crew. This was like the Bitcoin crew playing poker.
Yes, and they all lived. Everyone was in the Flatiron area, and I lived down there.
Oh wow!
And, the Winklevoss right there.
Oh, New York was
my
the
office,
center of this back then.
My trading floor, my company was right there in Union Square. And so...
Satoshi Square, right?
Was that?
Satoshi Square? Was that?
It was started by the guy who worked for me that introduced me to Bitcoin.
No way. What was his name again?
Oh, Jesus. I should know this.
You said it
Josh
on the
Rossi.
That's right. There you go. Okay.
Josh Rossi. Yeah. So he was, he was, he worked for me. And
there would be like cash trading basically happening in Union Square.
Right. So we kind of came up with this idea. He's like, we should just, and he had this whole romance around the Buttonwood tree on Wall Street where they first traded stocks like out in the open before there was a stock exchange, right?
Right.
And so he coined this idea, Satoshi Square, and like, we would go to these like kind of like meetups, or we'd go to this poker game that we got invited to. And it was always a one Bitcoin buy-in. And I remember the first time I was like, oh, Bitcoin was like $37 at the time or something like that. And the joke was, we're always going to play this game, but the buy-in is always going to be one Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I will say that I played in a game where the price was like 30,000 at one point. And at that point, that game was completely overrun by pros. So I was like, okay, now I know when to hang up my cleats. But
those are poker players at the table. It's interesting that poker. I have a cousin who's a professional poker player, and he was easily the first person in our family to get into Bitcoin because poker players were using Bitcoin. Like they were a major. It was a use case.
Very, very close friend of mine is this gentleman named Phil Locke, or also known as the Unabomber in poker, and he's a famous poker player. And I owed him like $260 from. We were playing backgammon, and he's like, "Oh, pay me in Bitcoin." He's like, "I want Bitcoin." I'm like, "Okay." And I think Bitcoin at the time was like $150 or something like that. So it's like I owed him like 2.1 Bitcoin or something like that. He's like, "Just hold on to it for me." I'm like, "Okay." And it was the most amazing hodl of all time because by the time I'm like, bro, can I just give you the Bitcoin already? I got to get this thing off my balance sheet, And then I think I finally, when I gave to him, it was like $120,000.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
I'm like, that was a good trade. But it was, it was just, So that's Satoshi Square, and so that's where I met. I met a lot of the other early people there, like Dave Namdar, is an old close friend of mine. I used to trade with him, and Owen Gundon lives also in Puerto Rico, and other people. All these, early people,
folks.
Winklevoss, all these other people would just
everyone was just, it was just like meetups. These folks were just hanging out at New York City
2013. And the weather was just getting nice, and literally my trading floor was a block away from there, and it was like in our neighborhood bar, which was on 15th, and right off the park, we'd go drink, and then we'd go to Satoshi Square, come back, but it got to the point where a lot of people would show up, and it was just like, I'm going out of the cash machine, I'm taking out thousands of dollars at a clip. Everybody's like handing around like envelopes of cash.
It was wild.
It definitely.
What was the other options? Like, how did you even interact with exchanges? You
didn't. Well, I did. I think that by this time I had left my partnership, right, in March of 2013. And I didn't really have a clear plan as to what I was going to do in Bitcoin, but it was clear to me that this is what I was going to do. Started trading a lot, and I had figured out your prices varied widely across the world. The key was banking, right? And I had half a dozen accounts closed in the United States. I'd go from one bank to the next,
you were getting debanked as a result of this. They knew what was happening.
Oh, yes.
Whoa.
And it was so discriminatory, and all that's coming out about choke point 1.0, 2.0, all this stuff. It's like, it is just amazing to me that this is allowed to occur. It is discriminatory. It's illegal.
Oh, it's
and
horrific.
Why no one's going to jail for any of this shit? It's just it's still astounding me.
They're somehow being encouraged.
Even the way they shut down Signature Bank. I helped them build that business, Signature Bank. I knew all those guys really well. What happened to them was wrong. The bank was non-insolvent. It was just Adrian Miller just wanted. They needed to take out 2 banks before they could actually invoke certain emergency powers at the Federal Reserve. They statutorily worked that way. So they were like, what are the 2 crypto banks? Okay, well, SVB, of course there was Silvergate, but that didn't go, they kind of voluntarily wound down. But then Signature Bank.
So this was a takedown, basically, is what you're saying.
It was a drive-by shooting. It was what they did, the amount of value destruction that occurred there was just, and then when Flagstar took over the bank, they took everything, but they refused to take any of the accounts associated with crypto. Now, I run a big family office, right? And I have like dozens of bank accounts on all kinds of investment related stuff that has nothing to do with crypto, but they shut it all down.
Oh, man.
And there's a lot of you're talking about overall that business, there was a few $1 billion in deposits and that Flagstar just wouldn't take it on. Why? Because they were told not to take it on.
It's just amazing to me, though, that back then they were even paying attention. That like this was happening in 2013, 2014, this level of like debanking.
Yeah,
I would have thought that was
still going on
modern.
in 2023.
Well, but I would assume
2022 rather. And so it's like that shit. It was just wrong. It was wrong, and I was never somebody that was very mistrustful of the government. I mean, I've always been kind of a libertarian type, but never like a crypto anarchist guy. I was like, I've owned and operated multiple regulated businesses and broker dealers and this, that, and the other. Like, I know my way around regulations. I know how to deal with people. I have a ton of licenses, and yet somehow I am being tarred and feathered, essentially by the banking industry. The whole thing is crazy, But back in 2013, I, after not being able to open bank accounts in the United States, I was figured out.
Oh, it got to that point where you literally couldn't even open. At any point were you thinking, I'm just going to quit, this isn't worth it?
Well, I was moving around millions of dollars at this point.
Oh, okay. So it was
worth it. When I was doing large-scale arbitrage trading quite successly. But I was at the time, I was 40 years old at the time. I have strong resume, went to a really good school. And I know how to put on a suit. I know how to KYC people at desks. I got on an airplane and went to foreign locations and opened bank accounts. And that was something that my cohort of young 20-somethings didn't know how to do.
Did they, when you would go to these foreign locations to open bank accounts, did they know why you were doing it? Like, did they know why? Did they know, like, you were unable to basically get a bank account in the U.S.?
Much.
They didn't even ask.
No, they ask. Or I tell them, I mean, I mostly couch it as I trade exotic instruments. But, you go to, like, foreign banks are used to dealing with offshore people that are doing weird shit in Africa or other stuff, and they're trading this or that, or like distressed debt over here, or they're trading on this frontier exchange there, like whatever, you know. So, they didn't really care, so long as, the counterparties weren't on an OFAC list or anything, So, so that that kind of kept the game going for me. All the way to the fall of Mt. Gox.
And you were just arbing between these different, like, small exchanges at the time, basically. These sort of, like, nascent, relatively immature
So
exchanges.
I ended up becoming a pretty big customer at a lot of these exchanges. And probably the biggest customer at Bitfinex at the time. Bitfinex is a very small player relative to the others.
Really?
Yeah, but interestingly enough, that it was small teams, like 3 people running it. It was like there's one. The founder was Rafael Nicole, who was a tech guy, young guy. He spun up that exchange from the open source code from Bitcoinica, which is an exchange that got hacked in 2012, and someone just open sourced the software to prove that there was no backdoors in the software. It was just like whatever. I forget the story there exactly. And it was Giancarlo Devasini, who is the CFO, and his friend of 30 years, J.L. Vandervelde, who's the titular CEO. And I started doing a lot of business with them, and they were banking out of mainland China, of all places, dollar banking. But I was moving a lot of money, and so everyone else is like, they just only want to talk to you over IRC or whatever. But Giancarlo reached out to me on Skype. That was the other platform we all used back then. He's like, I'd really love to get on a video call with you sometime and chat with you and just understand what you're doing and blah, blah, blah. And so it was unusual. He was the only, or should I say Bitfinex generally, was the only exchange that actually wanted to know their customer. And
deeply.
In a more sort of biblical sense, shall we say,
right. Like research, like understand the market.
I'm doing a lot of business. Who am I? And then I think I met, it was the first person I met that was older than me by a few years, right? So I'm like,
everyone else was what, like young punks running
kids.
Exchanges? Kids.
Early 20s, kids.
Like no business acumen probably whatsoever.
Well, and so one of the reasons why I decided I want to get involved in Bitcoin in the first place was it was clear to me that all these exchange platforms, including Bitfinex, were just terrible. I mean, and I had a lot of direct experience of some, 12 years of designing, really robust trading platforms for equities and options principally, but risk systems, ticker plants, strategies for throttling market data and being, stingy with bandwidth resources and creating really nice custom front ends and organizing the data and reporting and all this stuff. This is like database stuff. Like this is databasing is like, I guess would be my superpower. But, and I'm like, I know how this stuff needs to work. But you just couldn't build one in the United States. Right. I mean, people tried, people were getting shut down and this, that, and the other, like.
Was that the primary issue? Is just like how do you interact with the fiat system? I mean, no one felt like that was the issue.
But it was also like, oh, you're a money transmitter, you're a custodian of someone else's money. So there was just, and the regulations were there just was so little clarity around it. I mean, in late 2013 is when they announced they were going to do this bit license thing. And we thought like, oh, this is going to be good. And then the bit license turned out to be one of the most onerous, impossible license. It took 2 years for the first license to be issued.
Was everyone just getting shut down, or were people folding because they were concerned about regulations? Like what was
I think there were a lot of implied threats from regulators.
That scared people enough to
and I think that FinCEN, basically said like, you're a money transmitter. Now, it's one thing, you can register with FinCEN and report transactions. That puts you on the map. And then the idea is like everybody needs to get a state-by-state money transmission license, which, by the way, is so ridiculous that this is not a federal thing. Now, fortunately, the OCC has finally stepped up and created these kind of lightweight sort of deposit only kind of lightweight bank charters now, national charters but where were those?
Back then, when did that happen? When did that?
It started happening. They started wanted to create these things. I think it was in 2015, 2016, if I recall. But then, the New York Department of Financial Services filed suit saying, we're not going to recognize this in New York, I'm like, it was like a whole,
it was just a
constant turf battle.
Yeah.
Turf battle. So there was just so much uncertainty. And
did you know what you were walking into when you eventually decided to work with Bitfinex?
I will say that I was a little naive on a few fronts in the sense that I felt that I'd had, well, one, that owned and operated multiple broker-dealers. I knew how to run regulated businesses. I understood trading rules, wash sales spoofing, this, that, and the other. I knew how to, I knew what the best practices would be. Even though there was no rule book, I know what, if I had to write a rule book, I have great examples that I've lived with and worked within that this should be. And I try to be part of various working groups to try to, advise government on this stuff. I participated in trade organizations. I was one of the founding members of the Bitcoin Association in Washington.
You were the perfect person to try, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, certainly. There was almost no one in the industry at that time with my kind of experience. And so I thought that I got to leverage this. It's this market is trading this market is I'm used to trading extremely efficient markets, right? And this was shooting fish in a barrel. But it was just, there was a lot of hair on it. You had to really know how to navigate through kind of real world problems, and you had to know what was considered acceptable risk. I think there's this old expression that's been used over the years that it's better to ask forgiveness than ask for permission.
Mm-hmm.
Because back then, if you were asking for permission, you were going to go to your grave waiting for that no action letter.
Yeah, you were getting a no.
Which you never would get, right? Despite the fact that they had a statutory requirement to respond to you, at least something. And they just wouldn't. There was just so many rules and so many sort of standards that were just not applied to us because it was extremely frustrating. So you just really couldn't build it in the US, right? Coinbase did it, because they knew how to sing the siren song to Silicon Valley. The Winklevoss did it because they were very deep pocketed to begin with. But for either of those exchanges to become dominant, Gemini never became dominant, but Coinbase did not become dominant until 2018.
Took a while.
Yeah. So
at that time, would you say there was no dominant player basically before that? It was just
there was. There was Mt. Gox. Mt. Gox fell. And so my merry-go-round of arbitrage was I was one of these people that had figured out how to get money out of Mt. Gox. I knew that if I paid a 5% VIG, I can get it out. And if my arbitrage VIG was 10% gross, 9% after fees, 5% after the blood money, to get my money out of Japan, I was still making 3-4% round turn in a week.
Pre-Mt. Gox, were you concerned about security related to holding Bitcoin in these exchanges? Was that?
Of course,
okay.
But you're being paid for it. There's a lot of money to be made. Yeah, there's risks, but
there had been previous smaller blowups, I guess, before that, and people sort of understood the concept of not your keys, not your coins, or
sure. There have been other hacks and other things, and
okay,
yeah. Look, it's a risk, but if you're not taking risks, then there's
no money to be made.
That's exactly right. And so look, I wore big boy pants. I was, I understood the risks. When it happened, it hurt. But still made money, but a lot of it got taken off the table. I was able to, before it all shut down, I sold my Bitcoin for 23 Bitcoin for 1 Bitcoin inside of Mt. Gox for 0.23 Bitcoin outside of Mt. Gox through Bitcoin Builder. This guy Josh, I forget his last name, was built this thing. He's become one of the biggest Mt. Gox creditors as a result.
Huh.
But yeah, so I was able to get whatever I could out. Kind of had to hit the reset button, but it was around this time that Bitstamp became the next venue. right? And
Bitstamp basically like inherited the business of most of Mt. Gox.
Well,
at that time?
there's the volume all dropped off, but I mean, it's like the next biggest exchange or most legitimate exchange was Bitstamp, and they had just taken $20 million from Pantera, right? So it was the first VC foray into the exchange space, right?
Did that make people feel more trusting of them? I mean, do you think that mattered?
Yeah, I think so. I think it mattered to some. But anyways, around this time though, and it's kind of I continued to talk to Giancarlo at some point on a daily basis, right? Through the Mt. Gox crisis and what have you. But my conversations eventually came to like, look, because they had an interesting platform, right? It was a peer-to-peer lending platform for dollars in Bitcoin, and you could borrow dollars on the platform to basically get leverage on Bitcoin. It was something that was actually quite innovative. It was like it in some ways mirrored how the real world securities market worked, but did on a peer-to-peer basis rather than like there being like a bank that's providing broker financing or something like that. So it was like very innovative. But there were so many problems with the UI and how it worked, and like, no, you have to put the bids on the left and the asks on the right, and and so I kept telling Giancarlo like, this, well, you need to do this, and he's like, well, can you come and help us do this? And I'm like, well, I guess.
And you were kind of I mean, it sounds like you were kind of looking for something. I mean, your vision wasn't just to trade forever.
Yeah, but it's like I wasn't looking for a job. Like it's like, and that was the kind of thing. I'm like, I don't think you're gonna pay me. I don't think you're gonna afford me.
Right. You'd have to give me. So, I mean, did it just become like an equity situation? You became sort of like a leadership
this was, I guess, one of the best trades I ever made. The bet, I should say. It was the bet I made on myself, and that was the there was, they were small, they were profitable because they had almost no overhead, but they just couldn't pay out like a big salary, right. And I said, okay, I'll tell you what, don't pay me anything. I'll come work with you. And in 6 months, you can tell me how much equity you're going to give me.
Huh. Wow.
And because I just knew that I would have an outsized impact on being able to make that exchange like the exchange, and that is ultimately what happened. I mean, within about 6 months, by I think it was mid to late 2014, I think Bitfinex became the volume leader globally.
Within 6 months.
Look, this is like where people are sifting through the ashes of
it's a small
of Mt. Gox, right? I mean, sure. Bitcoin went to 1,100, and around this time, you were talking, it's like, I don't know, 400 or so, but Bitfinex's volume really started to pick up, and I was on these kind of like verbal chat rooms, so TeamSpeak and things like that, and talking to people, talking to traders, and I talk trader talk because I'm a trader,
right?
Lifetime trader. And we're constantly trying to make the platform better. And
what did you do? What do you think was like the most impactful like contribution that you made that really made the difference for Bitfinex?
Well, I think that there were several innovations that occurred along the way. I mean, the first is just like having this trading platform actually resemble the type of trading platform that, say, day traders would use for, say, stocks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It was like saying, okay, can we get real charting into this thing? Let's don't try to build it yourself. Just use this thing called TradingView over here. You can just drop in, you can use their widget, and look, you need to organize the bids and asks over here. And you need to group your bids and asks by certain price increments, and and then you need to change how you do the data, how you push the data to the front end, and how you also need to create, a reporting that's actually useful, that people can that you could actually compute your gains and losses from, that you could actually do your taxes with. I mean, there's so many problems, So a lot of it was like fixing things like that.
No one was thinking about that before, though. That's like wild to me that no one was looking to the stock market.
No one was thinking about it. Curiously enough, like from a tax standpoint, I realized early on that, I'd formed an entity to do all the trading. I couldn't do the gain loss reporting. I worked with so many exchanges, and it was just so impossible to deal with the data, the way they. It was clear that people who knew nothing about capital markets were running these exchanges and building them, right? So I had to offer something up for, like, it was called a 475 election, which is where you take a mark-to-market election on your taxes, so that, like, all I have to do is I have to know at the end of the year, what's the value of everything that I own? How much money did I put into the LLC versus take out? The difference is my P&L, and I paid ordinary income taxes on the whole thing. Even though if I had the ability to do gain loss reporting and individual tax lot selection, I'd be able to, like, okay, these are my long-term gains, these are my short. I could have paid less in taxes, but I just didn't have the data set to be able to accurately do it.
It's wild.
So
you took the hit.
Up until 2017, I was on I had to use this mark-to-market process, and I knew to use that because that's how broker-dealers do it for prop traders. Because prop traders, I mean, my firm was doing 2% of the volume in North America in stocks at one point. Like, you can't do gain loss reporting that way. You would be giving the IRS truckloads of documents, to file your return. You just have to just do mark to market and just treat everything as ordinary income. And that's just how professional traders do it. So that was like one thing that.
Were there other professional traders even trading Bitcoin at the time? I mean, like,
they were emerging. They were quiet.
Okay.
They were quiet.
They didn't make themselves known.
Bitcoin, if you were in TradFi, okay, Bitcoin was not the thing that you wanted to prairie dog on. You didn't want to say, hey, guys, like, I'm trading Bitcoin.
Guess what I discovered?
People like, you might lose your job.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, you might get kind of ostracized. You might all of a sudden the compliance officer might be asking questions, who knows? People kept quiet, it was, I remember in the spring of 2013, when I decided to leave my trading firm, Bitcoin $50 or so, I was at dinner with a bunch of my Yale classmates, and it just so happens that my sort of coterie of friends happened to be some of the most successful people out of my class. We're having dinner, and I just kind of said, well, hey guys, I just want to make a little announcement. And they're like, oh, what? I'm like, so I'm leaving my firm, and I'm going to be pursuing this thing called Bitcoin full time. And I remember one of my best friends pulled me aside after dinner. He's like, Phil, are you sure you're doing the right thing here? I mean, he was like, and it was like, I mean, referencing my wife and my children.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
He was sincerely
really concerned.
Was he concerned, like, you're just going to lose money and this is stupid? Or was he concerned about, like, the legality and the liability?
I think all of the above. It's a gray area. You might be dealing with criminals you don't know about. It could undermine the legitimacy of your career to date. It might make you unemployable in the future.
Wow.
I mean, any number of concerns are wrapped up in this.
So does that mean that, these sort of folks, normies, so to speak, were consuming active FUD about Bitcoin at that point already from the media? I mean, like, was the FUD machine
I think
rampant?
It was that spring that we had the Silk Road bust happen a little later.
Sense.
I think also it was just one of those things that was just the idea that a new asset class can emerge out of the quantum foam, in a sense, just seemed like just too much for someone, a bridge too far. If you think about
and
it,
not just an asset, a currency, right? I mean, that's even worse in some ways.
I don't like to think of Bitcoin as a currency. Still don't.
I don't either. But that was the That is the perception, right?
I think the way to think about it from a capital market standpoint is it was a new asset class.
Sure.
And you have to think of it like, when was the last time a new asset class had been introduced into the capital markets? I don't know. Maybe oil?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe we have John Rockefeller, D. Rockefeller to thank for that. I mean, like, I just don't know when the last time something became like something, a kind of an indispensable, recognized asset class. They would be very, I guess, natural resources that would eventually get commercialized, right? But this was just different. This had, it was like magic internet money, it was, yeah. And it was just, I just remember that, remember it like yesterday, yeah. And it was, but there are, I guess, most people will say that there's a few moments in their lives where they make a decision to do something and they just know that they're doing the right thing. And I had that very palpable feeling about this whole thing. I just knew that this is what I had to do. And I was just certain that I was going to navigate it and it was going to work out. I was certain. And I've never had that. Not true. I've had other moments of certainty in my life, but I knew when not to ignore it. It's like it's like when I had that feeling, it's just like, it's almost this like, a feeling of like destiny. Like it's something like this is,
there's no choice. It
was foretold that I'm supposed to do this kind of thing,
How many times in your life has that happened? Just out of curiosity.
I mean, a few times.
I mean,
but
it's rare.
I had, yeah, and I was early on lots of things, and a lot of things I didn't pursue. I should have pursued, but I just knew that this was what I had to do, and it was hard. I mean, I got completely fucked by my old partners, yeah.
In TradFi, your old TradFi part. How were they? How?
That's a long and sordid story, but I would say that I got completely fucked, and I didn't have the money to sue them.
Ooh.
I put all my money. I was into deficit spending mode. It's every last resource I had, I'd spent doing this.
Just because you left, or because you went to Bitcoin specifically, or?
Well, all my equity in that firm was just magically taken from me. Yeah. And I had, all my money was basically tied up in that. So I liquidated all my retirement savings, my life insurance. I went
to go all in on Bitfinex, basically.
I mean, prior to Bitfinex, prior to joining, but for the year prior to Bitfinex, I went all in.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah. And
was your wife supportive of this?
She was. And I'd been just a serial entrepreneur for a long time. I felt like this was my last time to roll the dice. I had 2 small children. That was the other thing too. I had to make it work. There was no other option, I just knew that I was going to make it work. I don't know how else to describe it. I mean, sometimes you just have that confidence in yourself or your belief in it. And I looked around at all the people in this industry. I'm like, I can do this so much better.
Did you remember this and sort of call back on those kinds of moments and have that resolve when hard times inevitably fell upon you?
So another funny story about another Bitcoiner that I got to know very well back then was Erik Voorhees, right? And he used to share office space with Charlie Shrem on 23rd Street, and I lived right around the corner. So, but I remember having lunch with him one day, And we're talking about the exchange space, and I'm just like, oh, one of these other small exchanges, Bitfloor, had just closed down, and it's like, I was just like lamenting just how, and Erik was my closest peer in the industry of anybody, people who understood capital markets. He was much younger than me, but very bright and one of the most eloquent speakers in Bitcoin, and just so smart and just wonderful guy. But
I actually met him for the first time last week. Side note, that was a treat at Joey Creek's wedding.
He's cool.
He is cool. He is cool.
And he's but I was really struggling about whether I just leave my company and just do this full time, because I couldn't. I just knew this is something that's going to require my full attention. And he pushed me over the edge. I remember it again like yesterday. He was sitting across from me, and I'm just talking about this, and I'm like, we got to, this is what needs to happen, do this. He's like, he was like suggesting, I could introduce you to Roger Ver. He backs a lot of this stuff, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. And then he just leaned across the table. He has those very piercing blue eyes. And he said, Phil, Bitcoin needs you. It needs you.
Well,
and it was, I get a little emotional when I think about that memory, because it was that moment. I left that lunch. I'm like, the decision was made. I'm going to do this, and I've told Erik this several times over the years. I'm like, that one time you may not remember, but I do.
Wow.
And it was that moment where I was just, and it was, because Erik at the time was really considered one of these sort of the Bitcoin elders at the time. He had Satoshi Dice, and it was like, doing really well. And like, I really was like, the fact that he was interested in being friends with me, I was very flattered, but it was that moment that it was the call to arms. That was, it was like, Uncle Sam needs you, and that was the moment.
And was that when you got involved with Bitfinex? Is that when you kind of made this?
Well, that's when I made it. So it was in 2013, and then I just spent the year basically just got whatever money I could, borrowed money from other people, and then started trading Bitcoin.
Okay, and that's when you went all in.
Yes, but I was only a trader of Bitcoin. I never bought Bitcoin to hold it. So when you
no one did. No one was holding it back then.
Well,
I guess
there were
handful.
Well, yeah. there were. I mean, Erik was one of them. Roger was one of them. I mean, there were people that had stacks from back then,
and they got it back then. Like they
got it back then, and they kept it, right.
But like intellectually, they got it.
I did not. I just didn't know how to value Bitcoin, so I was too stuck in my TradFi ways to think about that, right? So I was. Yeah, I just didn't know what the equilibrium value was, right, of Bitcoin at any one time. I did know, and I had started to meet a lot of these people over time, especially as I worked, as I became part of Bitfinex. I got to get to know a lot of. So eventually, we became the venue, and we were the global leader in volume leader for almost 4 years, right? It wasn't really till Binance came along and kind of took the crown from us. Of course, BitMEX was pretty big, but they were doing perps, so it was kind of not. We were spot traders, right? So, but yeah, so I got to know, all the really big traders globally into space, and there were many other things that we did at Bitfinex that kind of got us there, right? So, I mean, small things. I mean, like there was some aggressive hedge funds started to emerge in like 2015 and wanted to trade this stuff, right? But they're like, well, we need FTP drop copies at the end of the day. We need a SFTP drop for this, and we need something. I'm like, I know exactly what you need because I used to do this, right? I mean, I know how to, I know how to interface with clearing firms and stuff like that. This is what I used to do. So I was able to, I'm like, we're like, okay, I wrote some scripts and some jobs and like, all right. So they were able to connect and get data in a manner in which they were used to seeing it, in the format of seeing it: buy, sell, short, X number of units at this price, like just, it seems so fucking obvious today, but trust me, it was just no one else was able to provide this at the time.
Is it fair to say then that Bitfinex was the exchange that that sort of professionalized traders were using back then? I mean, was that driving the growth of Bitfinex?
It became that way. I mean, it was things like, oh, we set up so this is how Paolo Ordonio got involved with us originally, was that I wanted a fixed gateway to access the system. So people had used Fix to connect to venues. I'm like, we need a fixed gateway. And he was a consultant who did these things. He was living in London at the time. And like, Giancarlo found they're both Italian, and
this was like 2015, something like that.
This was late 2014, early 2015.
Okay. And he became CTO
much later on.
Much later.
No, I wouldn't say much later on. I think he was CTO by around the time of the Bitfinex hack, right in August of 2016.
That makes sense.
That's a whole story.
Became very important at that point, I imagine.
But yeah, so and then the other thing too is that, like, because we had one developer, right? It was Raphael, this guy, and he was look, really nice guy, smart, but like a kid. He didn't know anything about capital markets. He didn't know how it worked. Now, I told him to do it this way, and he would work on doing it this way. And like, okay, that was that part of it worked. And then I took over doing handling all the database stuff. That's something I had a lot of experience with. So I was coding and working every day doing this stuff. And again, like trying to start pushing the product so that it became TradFi friendly. And I say TradFi, I mean to the aggressive early hedge funds that were interested in getting involved in this space, right? And
the bad boys of TradFi.
Well, here's a few other things too. It's like the counterparty risk. That's a hard thing. A lot of these firms couldn't get their arms around the counterparty risk. It's like, we're going to send you a bunch of money and we're going to buy Bitcoin. It's like it's too much. So
it's kind of fair. Kind of a fair point.
Sure, but we have solutions for that in TradFi, right? I'm like, okay, well. See, here's the problem with Bitcoin and Bitcoiners is that they believe that decentralize everything.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. They believe that somehow that, everything just should be on chain, decentralized, this, that, and the other. Well, that's just not, code is law, right? Things like that. Just not how the world works, right? And I don't care if you could declare code as law. Law is going to tell you that you're wrong.
Yeah.
And I think, so the one innovation, I call it an innovation. It's hardly an innovation. It's just, it was the first time anyone did it in Bitcoin land was, if we had what we would consider a qualified counterparty, deep-pocketed, institutional trading firm, they trade all kinds of things. I mean, I'm not going to name names, but the big players that are still involved in the market today, we would say, okay, well, they're credit worthy. We'll establish a line of credit. Like, we'll give you a line of credit to trade on the platform. So most of the time they were just buying Bitcoin, expropriating Bitcoin, selling it somewhere else. They were doing large-scale arbitrage like everyone else was, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And they would have to pay for the Bitcoin before they took the Bitcoin off the platform. But they wanted the flexibility to be able to trade on the platform and dramatically reducing the counterparty risk.
Makes sense.
Now, our risk to them was the P&L risk in the positions that they were taking on. but we had recourse agreements, right? Before, it's all non-recourse because, well, no one was KYCing anyone. You didn't know who they were. Like, it's like if their account goes negative, who are you going after?
Right.
Right. But if you have a brokerage account and you have leverage and all of a sudden you're levered on the company that gets a bad FDA announcement and all of a sudden goes to zero, and all of a sudden you owe the brokerage account company, they're coming after you. If you withdraw money from an ATM by mistake, they gave you too much money by mistake, they're coming after you for that money. These are all recourse agreements, which did not exist in any exchange platform.
But Bitfinex was the first to offer this style. That changed everything.
We were quietly offering this to large customers that were approaching us. Yes.
Interesting. So that got the big players on Bitfinex specifically.
Yeah. And there were other exchanges that wanted to use our liquidity to seed their liquidity. So that was the other thing we realized, is that we just need to be a global clearinghouse for liquidity. And we wanted to support people who are running exchanges regionally, like in India or in UAE or in Norway or wherever. And they, for whatever reason, they had people that are depositing local currency and buying and selling, but they needed liquidity to put on their book, right? So they would source the liquidity from us through a credit line arrangement where we never really had any real risk because, maybe a little bit, but it was worth the business that we were getting,
Was that the majority of the business coming from other exchanges?
No. Okay. Well, toward the end, it became a lot of it, or toward the end of my tenure there. And that was, I think, another really important one is that, and then,
And no other exchanges were doing that, really?
No. They didn't really, all the other people running exchanges are still not people from TradFi.
Right.
It's like delivery versus payment. It's DVP trading. This is like a normal course of business on Wall Street.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have prime brokers yet. There was no hidden road. There was no nothing. There was, and it was just different, right? And so this is some of that was one of the innovations. I think we did cross collateral leverage, right? So I think we were the first to implement like portfolio margin across all assets on the platform. That's something that I worked on and encoded with Paolo. And so there was a number of these innovations that we had created that just attracted more activity to the platform, and liquidity begets liquidity. This is the one thing that, like, if you look through the history of the platforms that have been dominant and they've come and gone, it's a liquidity game, and it's a confidence, and not a confidence game like a con game, but it's about people's confidence in your platform, and people want to go where the spreads are tightest in the pool, and it's like, look, there were other things we did. We had our liquidation engine was very carefully designed to prevent margin cascades. We had what we called speed bumps in the platform, like where where there was the opportunity, even briefly, for liquidity to step in, and right the ship. Or look, if we were trading far away from another market, then we would put partner capital in to buy the dip if we had to. Whatever we needed to do if we knew that it was just a momentary imbalance, right? So there was all kinds of things that we were doing to try to make to professionalize the product, at the end of the day.
All right, guys, taking a quick moment to thank my new sponsors of the show. First off, the one and only Layer 2 Labs, pushing forward research and development of drive chains. Drive chains were first introduced as a soft fork proposal to Bitcoin, aka BIP 300, BIP 301. These BIPs essentially propose a bridging mechanism between Bitcoin and Layer 2s that are incentive aligned with miners, and they've gotten a ton of attention over the last couple of years. If you're curious about how drive chains could work in practice, though, check out layer2labs.com and download their alternative front end to Bitcoin Core. It lets you play with drive chains and see how they actually work in real life. I'd also like to introduce Hashi, an alternative primitive to traditional L2s that allows users to execute a wide range of Bitcoin DeFi activities without having to trust a federated bridge. With Hashi, Bitcoin is controlled by an MPC wallet that requires a quorum of proof-of-stake validators on the Sui network to execute Bitcoin transactions based on the validity of smart contracts. At least a third of the staking power of the Sui validators network is required to execute these MPC mint and redeem transactions, which is a substantive improvement in trust assumptions relative to other L2s or sidechain bridges. Hashi's commercial team is also stacked, including a crew of former builders from the crypto division of Meta. I think we're going to see a suite of super competitive Bitcoin DeFi products built with this protocol, so definitely check out the Hashi page on sui.io if you're curious. Last but not least, shout out to Bitbox. Bitbox is one of the easiest and most simple to use Bitcoin hardware wallets on the market right now. If you have friends or family members that you want to make sure stay safe and use cold storage, but maybe they're not the most Bitcoin native people in the world, I highly recommend checking out Bitbox. They're completely open source, no compromises on security, but they're also super easy to use, really intuitive UX. Plus, you can use them with concierge multi-sig services like Unchained, which I'm personally a big fan of. If you want to check out their hardware wallets, go to bitbox.swiss and use code BitcoinRails to get a discount. All right, back to the show. On the speed bumps front, I mean, were those things that you kind of foresaw and understood were coming and you were like, okay, this is the fix that we can implement because of your experience with TradFi? Or were you like learning? Okay, so it's not like these were hard lessons you were learning in real time.
No,
these were obvious things, basically, from your perspective.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know,
whereas probably everyone else was learning them in real time.
Because people, and people had some, learned the hard way, right? Like, you know, the people are always trying to do things like stop hunting on thin market conditions, and they're like, there's a stop order here, and that's going to trigger, and then it's going to cascade sell into my buy orders. I'm going to close out my position. I think people still try doing this, you know. But you know, we just were always cautious about how much leverage is in the system, and we're always looking at where the triggers were. You know, like we developed software for us to be able to analyze in real time what our risk was of, like, what would happen if a big sell order came in. You know, like we were stress testing our own liquidity, and these are all very sophisticated things that no one else was doing. You know, and a lot of people used to dump a lot of shit on us, you know, like we had all this volume, but people were always, we were always a very quiet company, right? We did not believe, we were never speaking at events. We were never in self-aggrandizing speaking tours and keynoting things.
Sounds like you were more B2B than B2C.
We were very B2B, and I was B2C in the sense that Giancarlo and I were very available to our traders. You know, I was a regular participant in a very casual online trader chat room. Like, being there, I'm just talking on an open mic for hours on end, hundreds and hundreds of listeners.
Strong relationships with the customers.
Yeah. And you know what? Always available. You know, one of the strengths that we had was that we had a principal that was basically awake in all hours. JL was in Asia, Giancarlo was in Europe, and I was in North America. And there was always someone available. And our big traders, we had just the same way that Giancarlo reached out to me in those early days, we reached out to all of our big customers. We knew them. They knew us. We met up with them when we go to conferences. You know, we would have like maybe a dinner. We'd invite people. But we were always super low key. We never did interviews. Didn't do podcasts. We didn't. But now, as a result, people thought we were shady. Oh, they're hiding. You know, no, it's just that
Just strong
nobody,
BD,
it was just, if people don't understand why you're successful, they assume that you must be doing something shady. And we kept our heads down because we didn't want to reveal our secret sauce. It was that simple. In many ways, what we were doing were trade secrets. And
because no one else was doing them. No one else was doing it. Right.
and it was these were like key innovations, and we were that was it. We were just hyper available to our customers. Hyper available day and night. I can't tell you how many times I've been woken up in the middle of the night over some crisis, like I remember the one.
V1.
I get dragged out of bed at like 3 a.m. in the morning because Vitalik wants us to shut down all the trading.
What?
This is during the friggin'
the Dow hack?
Yeah. Shut down trading. I mean, there's a great...
We gotta roll back the chain real quick.
There is a really great transcript from a chat room that a bunch of the exchange owners were in, where it was just, I mean, it was some comedy gold in there, but it's just ridiculous. Again, you're talking about, look, Vitalik, I have much respect for the guy, but these guys just don't understand how capital markets work. You can't shut down exchanges. People need to trade. What? And then they're
trading 24 hours, which is
24/7,
unusual.
and there's leverage in the system, and there's this, that, and the other. You can't, and this idea that somehow, and then the idea that they were gonna. That whole thing was a complete.
That's wild. I mean, did that actually affect? I mean, were there traders who lost positions because of the rollback? How did this chain rollback affect people who were trading?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. The details of that are lost in the fog of war for me.
Okay.
What I can tell you is that the birth of Ethereum Classic, though, corresponds with the rise of Tether.
Interesting.
So, I think parallel to all of this,
I was going to say we should move to the Tether portion now. Parallel to all of this.
So one of my early conversations with Giancarlo, before I'd even, joined, I think I joined Bitfinex in February of 2014. I kicked around this idea, I'm like, because we were already talking about how banking was a problem, and I'd like to preface my remarks by saying that, I claim ownership of the original ideas behind Tether. However,
meaning the original idea is called stablecoins?
I do. However, I don't, just like I think that, life can spontaneously emerge perhaps many places in the universe. I don't necessarily think that my idea behind this was necessarily unique. I have to imagine that this idea has occurred to other people.
Or that it was a matter of time. I mean, it was just so necessary.
We were the first to act on it.
Execute stablecoins.
And I came to Giancarlo with this idea. And he's like, that's a really good idea. And the impetus for it is actually, I think, quite interesting. And I've spoken about this before on a couple podcasts, but I'll share it here. The reason is that we wanted to. Here's the problem: getting banked as a Bitcoin exchange. And this is after there's some awareness about this. People talk about a bit license, right? But banks just didn't want to touch it. Okay, it became really hard to bank, right? And that's one thing we were good at Bitfinex. Giancarlo and JL, myself, we were all over the globe. We could figure out, we could find a banking relationship somewhere, right? That was interested in balances, was interested in the fees on all the transactions. It's like, we were good customers. You know, you just had to recognize that what we're doing is we're not shady. You know, we collect anybody that handled fiat with us, we collected copious amounts of KYC on. It's not like we were like, oh, they're not taking K. No, you cannot touch dollars, you know, without, you know, putting a microscope up
multiple driver's licenses.
Yeah. 2 forms of ID for sure.
Right.
Holding up a selfie, dated, signed, signature has to match your documents, this, that, and the other, you know? It's almost like holding up a current newspaper as like proof of life kind of thing, you know? But we were, and I think that we built good systems around that. But it was a problem. And I think that because enough had certainly had been introduced by regulators now, like regulators were taking notice, and they weren't giving any pronouncements as to what works and doesn't work. It was just more like, we'll get back to you.
Was it the part of the problem that you had customers who didn't want to KYC, or was the problem more just like dealing with the KYC?
Look, for a long time. Okay, so we have to step back in time and understand what the conventional wisdom told us at the time. And the basic belief, and we'd had gotten some indication from regulators that this was kind of their thinking too. But if you were crypto only, Bitcoin in, Litecoin out, Bitcoin in, Namecoin, Feathercoin, whatever people were fucking trading back then, regulators didn't care. Okay, or they cared less.
Oh, interesting.
Say. But if you were handling dollars, they cared.
Interesting.
Okay? Because then it became a money laundering issue.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're laundering one crypto into another, they're like, whatever. Right. You know, go have fun with your fake internet money.
Yeah,
right. Yeah. But and so we did the likes of like Cryptsy and MintPal, both exchanges that like, you know, owners like ran away with the money. You know, it was like, okay, those models are, you know, defensible. Like we could run that exchange kind of in the open and not worry about it. So what do you do about the fiat? I'm like, well, we separate the fiat from the crypto. So we have an exchange that handles only crypto tokens. One of those tokens being a dollar token that we create in this other company over here. At the time, I called it a crypto dollar. And
stablecoins you called crypto dollars?
Well, before, you know,
before this term,
Tether's my name. I came up with that, but before I spent time and effort on marketing and what, you know, and figuring out what the productizing, when it was just an idea, it was a crypto dollar.
Okay.
And I'm like, oh, and we just have this company. It's a simple company. You take dollars in from somebody and you give them these crypto tokens. And and back then there was these colored coin protocols, right? Colu, colored coin,
the early meta protocols on
Mastercoin.
This was pre-Ethereum land, basically. Ethereum didn't exist.
Ethereum did not exist. Yes, and so.
Was Mastercoin the big one? Is that the one that you ended up?
It was one of them. Okay. There was a bunch of them.
Did you end up using Mastercoin?
But it was Counterparty. Mastercoin. Yeah. So we ended up using Mastercoin. And so, but.
Do you remember why?
Yes. I'll get into all of that.
Okay.
But the idea was like, okay, well, we can figure out the issuance, because we know that, like, I mean, it was also obvious to me that people have been talking about this, but I'm like, yeah, you should be able to issue stuff onto the blockchain, right? And you can use OpReturn to like store information about that, and yeah, and there's several projects trying to pursue that. So I wasn't worried about the technical implementation at the time. I was just like, here's the idea, and then I'm like, okay, but the company is just a simple company, and it's like it just PayPal on the blockchain. And that was the tagline I used. And I'm like, we can open a bank account for that.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
And I guess, and I mentioned earlier on, like, there was some moments of naivete that crept into what I thought was otherwise, my rock solid understanding of how the world works, was that was not that easy. It was not like basic fintech. It's just PayPal on a blockchain. What I realized later is how much banks hate PayPal.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
PayPal doesn't have a banking license. They have to piggyback off of other people's MTLs. This is like when I started to go down the rabbit hole on the payments industry.
Oh, interesting.
And I'm like, holy shit, like, it is fucked up. We in our country, like, again, going back to this, like, why is there not a national charter bank, like a stripped down bank charter where all you're doing is taking deposits? You're not a savings loan. You're not issuing mortgages. You're not making risky loans.
Just straight payments.
You don't have duration mismatch. You're just taking money in, you're holding it, and you're redeeming it for other people. And by the way, PayPal, Venmo, all these guys, that's all they do is they hold on your money, they give you a balance on your thing, and can move it around to somebody else.
That's why none of them can be interoperable, probably. That's why there's all of these other technical issues, I think, stem from this.
Banks were threatened by this, so they didn't want to bank it.
And they were threatened because they just wanted to keep as many dollars in their custody as humanly possible so that they can get yield and interest
and they
in
want
all
the
the
customer.
Things. Oh, they just want the okay.
Yeah, because PayPal has to keep the money in the bank.
Right.
The banks are getting the balances. But,
interesting.
So this all goes back to when, I feel like it was back in the early 2000s or something like that. But like Citibank, I think it was Citibank, got the book thrown at them because some Mexican bank that they were doing correspondent banking with, like, was banking cartel money. It was like almost comical. Like one of the branches had a window through the bulletproof glass that was just large enough to put a briefcase full of like millions of dollars, like $1 million in a briefcase through the window, kind of thing. Like, it was like a bank that was designed for money laundering for narcos, right? And what ended up happening is that the various authorities in the United States, a whole bunch of sort of hyperactive attorney generals around the country, sued the correspondent bank, saying that making them responsible for the activities of their client bank. So basically, the sort of like regime of for a correspondent bank having to know about the activities of their customer's customer is what created this problem. There was no safe harbor in acting as a back-end rails for other dollar participants. And then when you're talking about that foreign bank also having a Bitcoin exchange as a customer, then the correspondent banks took the position that they had to know about their customer's customer's customer.
So you basically could become liable for information that was like impossible to even get.
Right. And for a SWIFT transmittal, whether it's $50,000 or $1 million, they collect $5.
Right. It's not worth the money.
And I'll tell you something about compliance officers. Okay. They don't get paid to say yes.
They get paid to say no. They get paid to be conservative.
They're paid to be conservative. Or there's no, it is, they're not getting bonuses for saying yes.
Right.
Right?
Right.
But they might lose their job if they say yes to the wrong person.
Right. The incentives are to be as conservative as possible, basically.
Correct. And so that's where this is where it all started. And this is all pre-Bitcoin, So it just became difficult. So
the legacy system came with like all of this baggage that was like predisposed towards bias in the Bitcoin,
which is why the Bitcoin industry had a lot of pain in common with the payments industry, the non-bank payments industry,
like PayPal, Venmo, because they were dealing with all the same challenges.
Yeah, and there were so many of them overseas, and most of them had to locate overseas. It's just hard to do the business in the United States.
Interesting.
Yeah, so there's a lot of shared DNA there in terms of like banking problems, right? And so I did not know that. So I naively assumed that, like, well, we're not a big ball of hair and gum and schmegma, like Bitcoin exchange. Like, I can't get my, bank. No one could get their arms around that. No one wants to bank. It's like, you're a broker, you're a custodian, you're a clearing firm, you're an exchange, you're a money transmitter, you're a custodian, whatever. You're doing all kinds of things. Like, which, by the way, in the real world, you have clearing firms, you have custodian banks, you've got people who do the broker financing, you have brokers that are separate from clearing firms. You have, you have all these Chinese walls. They're typically all separate companies. Not in Bitcoin land, it's all one company.
Oh man.
So, where are your Chinese, where are your protections? How do you ensure that you're not fucking over your customer somehow? And I agree, these are all legitimate concerns given the milieu that they were in. I'm telling you, there's I have a whole set of policy commentary about monetary policy that intersects this, but we'll see if we have time for that. But I think,
would you say that the issue, so there's like kind of two concurrent issues. One, the banks don't like it, right? Just like for their bottom line, they want control of the customer. And then there's also this sort of separate, the compliance people are sort of incentivized to say no and not let things happen, which was the bigger issue.
They hard to say. I think it just would vary on jurisdiction and the situation, and it would vary over time. There was a thought at one point that, like, oh, you got a bit license, you'd be okay. You still couldn't get a bank account.
Oh my gosh.
So. Yeah, it's
how are these challenges overcome? Eventually you
I think
figured it out.
Well, it required some enterprising banks to understand there was an opportunity here. So
just to get the first stables available, that's people in TradFi needed to understand the potential of what this could be.
Right. So look, in the beginning, we were banking out of Taiwan, right? JL lived in Hong Kong/Taiwan, so he had a lot of relationships there, and there were banks that were willing to bank Tether and Bitfinex for that matter. And so we had a pretty good run of it there until spring of 2017. But
when did Tether officially launch?
It launched toward the end of we launched toward the end of 2014. It was early 2015, I think.
On Mastercoin?
On Mastercoin. So this is an interesting story of the early lore of Tether. I'd sent emails to all the people running these different programs. I'm like, hey, I'm looking for something to do this or that. The only person that got back to me was Craig Sellers at the Mastercoin Foundation.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so we started Skyping, and I'm like telling him about my idea, but these early issuance protocols also didn't really think through what they were doing, right? So
most of them were community-led projects, like Counterparty, like they hadn't raised money. They weren't, they were just sort of.
Well, Mastercoin did
raise money.
Right. And
in theory, they were more incentivized to be professionals.
Yeah, but there's a few weird things. Believe it or not, back then, it was about issuing. It was a protocol that was appropriate for something like an NFT. You issue something once, and that's it. I'm like, no. I need to be able to do continuations.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a difference between Bitcoin and Ethereum still, arguably. Meta protocols on Bitcoin, this is a problem that hasn't yet been solved.
Oh, no. Mastercoin solved it.
Oh, they did solve it.
Well, yeah. How else could we run Tether? So, but we had to say, if somebody sends us money,
right,
we need to be able to mint new Tether and give it to them.
Okay.
And we need the ability to burn that tether if it comes back to us.
Right.
More importantly, we needed the ability to quarantine and freeze tether. Right?
For regulatory purposes.
Mm-hmm.
And
this is another thing that people don't understand. People say, oh, Tether's so shady, this, that, and the other. I'm like, you know what? We have had hundreds, even by the time I left, hundreds of interactions with law enforcement and dealing with people's subpoenas and court orders. And yeah, look, they tell us freeze this address. We're going to freeze the address. If we have the right authority to tell us that, even in situations where we were part of like a whole circle of like, I was constantly talking to other people who ran exchanges. We were all frenemies, and if there was a hack that occurred, we had like a quick response chat room that everyone was in, and we would step in, and if somebody was sending it to any addresses that we recognize or in our system, we would freeze it until further notice. Ask questions. Where'd you get this from? This, that, and the other. Send us, if you were using Tether on our platform, you had to be KYC'd, right? Because we consider the same thing as dollars, right?
Yep.
But even just generally in hacks, if a Bitcoin hack, something shows up on our platform, we're like, you want your Bitcoin? KYC.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's still, this is
there were people that
works.
There were people that just walked away.
Wow.
Yeah, of course. If you got caught red-handed, right, that we know that this is stolen from another exchange,
right?
You're not going to KYC for your money,
right.
You're going to say, I got okay. That's just
like,
part of my proceeds. If that's the tax, But the idea is that early on we knew that people were going to, because you're using Bitcoin addresses to send Tether around, we knew that people were going to end up burning Tether because they send it to a Bitcoin address that doesn't support Tether. People sent so much Tether to Coinbase.
Oh, wow.
And it took Coinbase like 3 years to implement Tether to recover millions of dollars of people's Tether.
Oh, man.
And it was just like one of those things where, now, if there were times where, but our solution was that, if you can prove to us that you sent it to yourself, it's your Coinbase account, you can prove to us your Coinbase account, we'll destroy that Tether. We'll issue a new Tether. It's like and by the way, you can do that when you're running an issued asset. Mm-hmm. You cannot do it when you're running a decentralized L1 crypto.
Yeah.
But issued assets need this capability. And it's not just Tether. If I'm issuing Apple stock, on the blockchain, I need to be able to and I find out that Kim Jong-un is a shareholder all of a sudden. I need to be able to freeze that and sanction it.
Makes sense.
You know? And by the way, if, you own a bunch of stock certificates and there's a fire in your house, guess what? You can get them reissued.
Yeah.
Right. And it's the same idea here. We need to offer that kind of big, and here's the other reason, is that be your own bank sounds good. It's a lot of responsibility.
Yep.
I'll tell you, even I, as a really experienced crypto guy, after I left Bitfinex and, they'd completely pivoted away from the U.S. and I, as admittedly a very large shareholder, I was living in the U.S. and I considered moving to London at one point, but I had 3 kids here. I'd given up my left testicle to get them into the school that they're in. I'm not going anywhere, and I ultimately had to part ways. Now, and ultimately I had to take all my assets off the platform too. And this is the first time that I'm like, well, what do I do? I guess I get myself a ledger.
Wow.
And I'm telling you,
nerve-wracking.
I had steel plates with a hammer. I'm like, I see phrase. What do I do? I can't put it all in one place. I have to break it up in multiple segments. And I was literally burying them and making maps. And I'm like, I got to give one to one lawyer, the other one to the other lawyer in case I die, and I'm just like, this is ridiculous. And for one of my porcos, Casa kind of figured this out with their succession product, which is a very good product.
Amazing product.
Yeah, great product. Would love to plug for them. But yeah, this is a problem. And like, it's nerve-wracking. Like, what? It's a lot of money. What if something happens to me? You know?
Yeah, self-custody is no joke.
I can't really, but can I trust my wife to give her the private key? I mean, or can I trust anyone? You know? So it's kind of a no-starter. Like, so yeah, not your keys, not your Bitcoin. Yeah, I get it. Okay. And I'm an old Bitcoin maxi at heart, but that is not the real world. And Bitcoin will never gain mainstream adoption until you have qualified custodians in place who are insured, who take this problem off your hands. You don't have to worry. You pay for it. You're going to pay for somebody else to be your custodian. But think about the peace of mind. You know, I don't want to store a bunch of dollars underneath my mattress. I want to keep it at the bank. Even though I know, things can happen at banks, but it was really nerve-wracking. And I was not comfortable with that. And so I would say at the end of the day, it was clear to me in 2017 that the future of Bitcoin, the future of crypto was going to be in RWAs. I was unfortunately quite early on that, too early.
Wow, really?
I made some early investments there that, like, in companies that were trying to do this, just the regulatory climate wasn't there.
Stables were arguably the first RWA. I mean,
well, Tether is the original RWA.
Yeah, Tether.
But so obviously, I'm like, well, we could do other things, like you could tokenize anything, right? Yeah. But one of those things is that you cannot expect the users of RWAs to be as savvy with cybersecurity and key management as the hardcore Bitcoin the crypto anarchist guys.
Yeah. 99.9% of people are not holding their own keys.
No, and they don't want to.
Probably ever.
They don't want to. And if that is a requirement, they'll be like, next idea.
Good luck.
So I think that developing those aspects into the protocol was necessary. So backing up to this is around, spring of late winter 2014. So Jean-Carl and I formed Tether Holdings. This was revealed in the Panama Papers. And we went to Amsterdam, conference there in April, and we were going to go, we had sit down meetings with the Bitstamp guys, Kraken guys. And my idea was that, hey, this is something that we should all co-own. This should be like a community, like a credit union, kind of like a community-owned bank, or some thing this solves, this solves all of our banking problems, right? They looked at me like I had three heads. The Bitstamp guys wouldn't even look at it because they had this guy who's their new chief legal officer that was installed by Pantera, right?
Interesting.
George Frost was his name. Another guy that now officially the oldest guy I knew involved in crypto at that point. It's this old, smart, nice guy, but this was no way they're going anywhere near this. And, I had so many conversations with Jesse Powell about this over the years, but nope, And
it was just regulatory concerns for them.
Yeah.
I mean, they were just no way.
This seems too risky.
Be a nightmare. Yeah. What was your response to that reaction? I mean, were you like, no, we'll figure it out. I got this.
Well, okay. So the reality is that Tether languished in obscurity for couple of years.
It just had no adoption.
Well, we had other problems. I mean, so I had shared this idea with Craig. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to spend some time working on this. And I kind of made a whole slide deck, came up with that Tether. It was pretty good. We got the tether.to, Tether2 is the website.
Tether's great. What a clever name, Phil.
Thank you. But and we were just trying to find some buy-in, this, that, and the other. And like, we were still kind of working on it, but I guess Craig went and had a chat with Brock Pierce about it. And I know Brock really well. I like the guy a lot, but he is the king. At least back then, he was the king of vaporware. He was just all about press announcements, and so he's like, it's like, we're launching a real coin. I'm like, and it's listed Craig's name in there. I'm like, I call him Craig. I'm like, what the fuck is this? He's like, well, I don't know. You guys didn't seem like you were moving quickly. I'm like, what? You don't even courtesy to call me,
know.
Like I'm waiting on you guys to come back with protocol changes. Like we're gonna use you guys.
Were they involved with Mastercoin at that time?
Craig Sellers.
Craig
ran. Craig ran. I mean, it's David Johnson was the CEO.
But I mean, was Brock involved or No, Brock was just a friend of his who caught wind of this, basically.
So Brock, and then
and Reeve Collins was also involved.
He was a friend of Brock's.
Okay.
And, Reeve, and then there was this other guy, William Quigley. The three of them formed Mastercoin. And so we agreed to partner with them. We had developed some strong branding around this. I think that we were an exchange. And we were at the time, we weren't the biggest exchange yet, but we were definitely pretty ascendant. And we kind of bought into Brock's claim about him strong-arming all of his portcos into adopting Tether. That was his big selling point.
Really? He was like, I'll get them all to use this.
And he's like, I got a CEO for you. They wanted to kind of base it in America. And at the time, I thought that would work, right? Because I'm thinking PayPal on blockchain.
Right.
I'm naively thinking that this is, we got this.
Yeah.
But they, and I'm not here to cast aspersions, but I will tell the story as it happened. They had made a lot of promises. They had some money, right? Reeve Collins managed to raise a couple $100,000 from his friends and family. So Brock Pierce did not put in a single dime into this thing, and nor did William Quigley, who was like a web entrepreneur guy, made money in the 90s, but claimed to have all these relationships that would be important, this, that, and the other. So we had agreed to merge with them on a 60-40 basis. They had a 60-40, so we created Tether Holdings, and we gave Real Coins 60% of that, and then Giancarlo and I were on the other 40%.
Basically, in exchange for their purported relationships, essentially.
They were gonna spin it up. They were gonna do the web development. They were, Craig was going to be the CTO over there.
Real Coin was like a Mastercoin plus Reeve Collins and Brock kind of subsidiary situation. Okay.
Yeah, and they were gonna build the website. They had the dev team to do it. We didn't have the real resources to really build this thing out. Reeve had experience, develop. He was came from in internet gaming, right? So he understood high risk payments and things like that, on Poker Room kind of thing. And he had some experience running dev people, I guess. So he seemed nice enough. And,
so it felt like a fair trade, 40% of the business.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that we also recognize that Brock's one great strong suit was publicity.
Yeah.
And it was actually we had negative publicity value.
You mentioned.
Because we just didn't do that.
You don't do press. Yeah.
We don't do that. So okay.
Right. And Tether is a consumer product, ultimately. I mean, it's the ultimate consumer product. Yeah. You needed that.
Yeah. So fast forward. So say they blow through a couple $100,000. We end up raising $400,000 from somebody else. Now, by the way, this is a crypto winner. Money was hard to come by.
Yeah.
In 2014. Okay.
These numbers are still blowing my mind.
Yeah. But we raised a $400,000 from someone in Giancarlo's network.
Okay.
Okay. So we get that. Then they blow through the $400,000. And then
probably not the most conservative spenders, I imagine.
Okay. So now we still haven't launched the product yet. They're now on their third website rewrite.
Ooh.
And I'm like, and I've been in and around software development for a long time. And I'm like, no. And I have to say, Reeve Collins was not the right guy for the job. He's the right guy for other jobs, and he's a nice guy, but he was just again, this is a business where we had to ask for forgiveness, not ask for permission. We had to get out there, and it was like the strategy was like it's like a deer in headlights about actually trying to launch this thing. And
he was CEO of Realcoin?
Yeah, or of Tether, of the combined entity. So they are technically co-founders. Okay, he is technically, he was technically CEO for a while, and then Reeve started coming out of pocket himself for about another $100,000. By the way, Quigley and Brock, not a red cent. So then they just ran out of money, and they wanted us to put in more money. And at this time, we're doing pretty well as an exchange, right? Like we're the number one guys. We're making money every month. But Giancarlo and I just had zero interest in putting any money into this thing if we didn't have control.
You were like over it. You were like, you're not performing. We want it back, basically, is kind of what it sounds like.
Yeah. We had implemented it on our exchange, but when you have when you're the only person with a fax machine, that fax machine is worthless. There was no network effect. I think no one implemented it. None of Brock's port codes except maybe GoCoin, which is a payment processor for like Backpage, like girls, for like the kinds of things that you didn't want to be associated with.
He didn't exactly fulfill on his BD promises, basically. And
not that he didn't try. It was just like, I think he naively assumed that everybody would adopt this. It's a good idea. I mean, but whatever the case was, the arrangement was that these things we were delivering on what we said we would do, and so I led the effort to forcibly buy them out.
This was when?
This was in August of 2015.
So it was before Tether really started. I mean, was it before even the move to Ethereum? Yeah.
So August of 2015, I remember it because I remember sitting on a park bench in Fire Island, just having this long conversation, and we bought them out for exactly the amount of money they put in, which is to say, we gave Reeve Collins about $300,000 so that he could pay back his friends and family at par. And then, but Quigley wanted to get paid off. And look, I've hung out with the guy since, and I got no beef with him. But at the time, it was just like one of those moments where I'm just like, out of principle, I cannot pay you anything. It got down to $25,000 he wanted. And I'm like, you are not getting $25,000. And it got to the point where I had to tell Reeve, I'm like, you're the one who are making whole.
You didn't think it was worth just giving him $25,000 just to shut him up?
There have been many things I've done in my career that maybe don't make sense, but I do out of principle.
Interesting.
I consider myself a very principle-driven, ethical player, and this is like one of the things that just wasn't right. Now, look, sometimes you have to make business decisions, but this is one that this is one where I knew I didn't have to pay money because at the end of the day,
you were going to win.
I was going to win, and Brock didn't get paid anything. Now, I did
Did they retain any equity? No.
So we allowed Craig to retain equity. He was the only one.
Kind of makes sense.
Yeah. And, but, yeah, and because he and his guys, they were handling a piece of it. They were actually doing something for us, right? And look, there was a dev team that we liked and we would continue to work with, but we were just not going to put more money in unless we owned it and controlled it. And the only thing I did offer to kind of make the deal happen with Brock, partly because I still recognize that there's potential value with Brock down the line, was that I did offer him a option on the tiny slice of my shares at a nominal value, which he exercised much later, way beyond the expiration. But I chose to, and that was actually blockchain capital.
But you honored it.
And I chose to honor that. Wow. And that's worth billions now.
Wow.
But again, it was like one thing I'm actually proud of, because it's like in the sense that it was a handshake. All the most important deals I've ever done in my life have been handshakes.
You didn't have to give it to him basically legally.
I didn't have to do it. But it felt like the right thing to do. I had to do it out of my end. Giancarlo did not want to do it. But I felt like I needed to get this deal done, so I did it out of my equity. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Good on you.
Bart Stevens likes to tell this story all the time, but it was very meaningful for them at the end of the day.
Of course.
But it got the deal done, and we bought it all back for exactly how much money they put in. And I think that to Giancarlo and to me, that felt like we were just very frustrated, that we felt like we didn't get what we had bargained for there. And, it's like, and it was a matter of principle. We felt like that was the only price to pay, because if they weren't going to do it, we're like, you know what? Fuck it. We'll come up with a new name, we'll launch our own thing, and we can make it successful. And we had money then. We knew we had the ability to spend on this and make it work.
Yeah.
And
you didn't need to rename it though either. I mean, you didn't. I mean, did you?
We didn't. Well, I didn't want to rename it. I fucking love the name.
Yeah, it's a great name.
But we still had very little traction. I think at the time we bought Tether out, I think the total Tether issued to date was like $1 million. And it was mostly Bitfinex minting it and just holding it in treasury. No one was using it. Okay. So what changed? Well, this little exchange called Poloniex emerged. They couldn't get banking, and they used Tether. So their trading pairs are USDT trading pairs. And they were tiny, right? But they started listing like lots of like shitcoins, right? Now, we were purists over at Bitfinex. So for the longest time, all we had was Bitcoin and Litecoin. And then we added...
And Tether.
We added Darkcoin at one point.
Okay.
Which later became Dash.
Exotic.
Which we later just at one point then discontinued later. Or maybe they still have it. I don't know. But we were slow to add Ethereum.
Really?
Yeah, there's a good story about that.
Huh.
It was, because the Ethereum Foundation people kept reaching out to us, like, really lisping. And we're like, okay, what are you going to do for us?
Huh.
Oh,
interesting. Okay.
So interestingly enough.
Did they come to you about Tether specifically at some point?
No, not about Tether. They came to us about wanting us to list Ethereum.
Sure. But I mean, at some point, was there a conversation about, okay, well, this could be a way that they could help?
No, there was never a conversation about that because it was like, it's decentralized. It's ERC-20. It was
right,
really
you can
up to
just
us
use
to do
it.
Yeah, you didn't need their permission.
Sure.
But they wanted us to list Ethereum.
Right.
And we're like, oh, well, I mean, I don't know, who was it? Hunta Stein. She was at the foundation at the time, and she called, and she's like, her and someone else on the call with us. And it's like, this is like one of those classic situations where you just have to read the room and know who you're talking to.
Mm-hmm.
But she was telling us about how Ethereum is going to kill Bitcoin in 6 months and this, that, and the other. I'm like, that's not the conversation you have with a bunch of Bitcoin maxis. Like, you don't tell me about how you're going to, and it was just like, they had such big expectations back then. And we're like, well, so you want us to do this integration? Can we buy some Ethereum from you guys cheap? We're like, no, we can't do that. I'm like, why not? We're the biggest exchange. Oh. You want us to list it? It's like, okay, well, we'll just take our time with it. Yeah, Bitstamp didn't list it, but Poloniex listed it.
Ethereum.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And
so
Poloniex also is listed Lisk and the DAO.
Did they have a Tether Ethereum pair pretty quick on the game? Okay.
But we did not have Ethereum.
Oh, interesting.
So there came a point where we said, we got to start, because Poloniex started doing some volume. Like, people are really trading this thing. Mm-hmm. And they listed XRP.
Okay.
A lot of people trading XRP there. I'm like, we gotta get on this bandwagon, right?
Yeah.
So we
This is why you list shitcoins.
Right. And we had, at this point, we've been working very closely with Paolo, and he's like, he could just spin this stuff. He was just, I will say, working with him for some 3 years, something like that, was one of the greatest professional collaborations I've ever had in my life.
Wow.
Working with him I worked with him very, very, very closely. And I was just, it was so great to work with somebody who just got it. Not just as a technical person, but like the business issues. It's no wonder why he's a CEO now of Tether, right? Sure. He's so bright. He's so hardworking. Could not be a nicer guy. And just dogged. And it was just such a pleasure working with him. But so anyway, he just knew he had extremely strong technical skills, and he could just spin this stuff up. And we did great. There's a time where it's like, this is also against the backdrop. We were like trying to maybe, we needed a new matching engine, right? We were talking to Alpha Point about trying to use their matching engine, and we did almost a 1-year project trying to integrate it, and then we had to abandon it because it's like, we realized doing neurosurgery on a wake patient is almost impossible. And then we started getting involved in the BitGo thing, right? Because that was our hack,
right?
It's like, well, if we could do actual delivery, then there's the exemption to the CEA about being able to do leveraged trading and whatever. That's a whole another story that ends up in the hack. But so Paolo was able to make these things happen, spin up these things, and he was a huge crypto enthusiast. Who also understood TradFi because he built TradFi systems beforehand as a consultant. And it was, and so we started spinning these things up. And then what people realized was now this arbitrage quarter existed.
Of course.
Because now our network went from 1 to 2. And there was enough volume over there that it mattered. Mm-hmm. And so people just realized, wait a sec, and I can use Tether. I can do arbitrage, which in fiat would take me a week, which now I can do in 10 minutes.
Yeah. Oh, my God.
30 minutes. We waited 3 confirmations, right?
Sure.
And that's where it started. And then
everyone rushed in.
Yeah.
Is that when Tether just blew up, basically?
It started to move, and I'll give you the stats there. Like I said, it was about 1 million that we had toward the end of 2015 in there. At the end of 2016, and this is already people are starting to use this, okay, but it was really there's only $6 million in Tether.
Huh.
At the beginning of 2017.
Okay. Noted.
At the end of 2017, I believe it's 1.7 billion.
Whoa. Oh my God, that's wild.
Yeah.
Oh,
and it continued.
So that's explosive growth.
Explosive growth. And this is where people are like, oh, it's fake.
That's when the FUD machine turned on.
That
basically.
Summer of 2017, the FUD machine.
That was like when it went crazy. And what were like the core lines of FUD? Auditability, AML stuff.
I'll get into all that. I mean, but yeah, but the point was
just
is that
like a brief, yeah.
But the fact is, like, all of a sudden the world woke up and realized that Tether, a stable coin was like an important piece of crypto infrastructure.
Right.
And like I said, we had languished in obscurity for a couple of years. We had so many fits and starts with actually getting the product off the ground, management changes, ownership changes, like finding resources to work on it. And it's just like, one of those things, quickly. It's a fucking good idea and no one is listening to you. It's like you're shouting from this, like, it's like, I feel like, it's like, you're coming off the mountain with stone tablets, and people are just, worshiping idols,
it's what is it? Slowly then suddenly, right? Or
yes.
whatever the phrase is, right?
Yes.
So it was 3 years of no one caring, and then all of a sudden 6 million to 1.7 billion, like overnight.
Yeah, and then it was just that was the problem. It was too successful.
Right?
It was like, because anytime, this is true about anything, anytime somebody makes a lot of money really quickly that people don't fully understand, they think you're a criminal, and it's just how people are. I think it's a function of jealousy, mistrust.
Who do you think were like the FUD enemies? Like, who was behind the FUD?
Okay. I don't want to say this definitively because I don't want to be accused of slander or libel. Because I don't have proof.
Sure.
But I'll name it. I'm pretty sure that Jeremy Allaire was behind it.
Really?
That is my deep, deep, deep suspicion, and because I've heard other people close to him say to me that he's essentially, that this was, they were part of that machine. I'll tell you, this Bitfinex guy, I don't know, couldn't have been one guy. He was tweeting 24/7, 600 tweets a day, this, that, and the other, and meanwhile, I was being slandered and libeled every day, because it's untrue. There was not a shred of evidence, that turned out to be anything about this because, I knew. Well, first of all, I knew the money was in the lengths I had to go through to convince people that we weren't shady. Like, I was like, because we didn't want to talk about where we banked because this is what people did. Like, if you banked somewhere and like there was an army of people there was like an army of people who start calling up the bank. Do you know that you're banking blah, blah, blah? They're criminals, this, that, and the other. And then can't get shut down.
Oh my gosh.
Right. So that's tortious interference.
Mm-hmm.
Whoever was doing that is fucking illegal.
Huh.
Oh. Or certainly, subject to civil action. But, there was a lot, and the campaign was coordinated. And I can't say definitively, but I'm pretty sure Jeremy was behind it. And so I'll say it, and I'm sure that there's people out there that know that definitively, and I would love for them to come forward. but it was.
And this was just competitive, basically.
Yeah. Look, I'll hand it to Jeremy in the sense that, like, I spoke to him very early on in the very early days of crypto when he was first starting Circle. And I know, and I had a lot of respect. I mean, like, I used to use this Cold Fusion product that he developed back in the pre crypto days. I have a lot of respect for the guy. And I think that he's a shrewd businessman. I think that he's a cutthroat businessman. I think that he's, again, I'm not saying that he did it. I'm saying that I believe my gut tells me that, and I don't have any evidence beyond hearsay.
But it feels like there was someone with business interests specifically on the other end of it.
At the end, I'm also going to say, like, who else could it have been? Who else would be? It was because the campaign was coordinated.
It was too
sophisticated. And whoever was running that account, it couldn't have been one person. And somebody who was extremely motivated. It just doesn't make sense, and it only thing that makes sense is a competitor who is willing to basically, go all out,
get dirty.
Yeah.
What was the height of this? I mean, did this ultimately, like, what kind of real problems did this create for you? I mean, like, were you?
Are you kidding me?
No. I mean, I'm just asking, like, if you could share a little bit more about, like, what happened.
Okay, so at my kids' school, my kids go to a school very prestigious school here in Manhattan, where, their classmates, they're all the sons and daughters of the so-called masters of the universe, right? Major hedge fund players, important people, things like that. All these people have known that I'm a crypto guy, right? And so they all look down their nose at me, right? The Goldman guys, or this guy, like, I was always the shady guy. So my only thing I could do is outgive them all, like, well, my money's as green as yours, but when the Tether FUD started coming around, it's like being in a room where everyone thinks you might be a criminal.
Jesus.
And it's just a really uncomfortable feeling.
Yeah.
And I spent millions of dollars just making sure that I didn't get indicted for something. Because that's the other thing too. If you're not careful, the way our legal system works is that, like, thank God I had the resources I and Giancarlo and Bitfinex and Tether and whatever have the resources to do something about it and get in front of it. Because if you're not out there making sure that everybody in the process knows your stance on this and your opinion, then they just kind of float into a grand jury. They present whatever case they want to present. Remember, grand jury testimony is one-sided. Prosecutor just used to convince them. They don't hear from the defense.
So you were concerned that there would be, like, legitimate, like, charges that could fuck up your life, basically. I mean,
because in America, especially at the white collar upper level, it doesn't matter. The conviction doesn't matter. I mean, yeah, it matters, but you're going to spend 3 years, being assumed that you're guilty because that's how our system works. The indictment is what kills you. Yeah. The indictment is when they start returning your philanthropic money. The indictment is when they don't invite your kids back to school. The indictment is when when the co-op building won't accept your application. It's bad news. And, like, they were really flirting with stuff. And, like, we would have won. But winning is like, what? After your life is upended?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it makes sense. I mean, but do you think that level of scrutiny would have come up regardless of, let's just say, for the sake of argument, Jeremy or whoever was behind these trolling accounts, et cetera? Do you think that you could have gotten that level of regulatory scrutiny regardless? Was that
I will tell you that when the complaints were drawn up, that they were worded in such a way that it was clear that these guys had talking points given to them, or that they were copying and pasting from this guy's fucking Twitter account.
Oh, wow.
the accusations, you know, and the kinds of the requests, the subpoena requests they were asking for us were basically an attempt to substantiate, you know, these completely ridiculous claims that this anonymous blogger was making, who is clearly not one person, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, this guy's Twitter handle. This guy is like, it's around the clock, like something on average of 600 tweets a day or something like that. Like
clearly
round the clock.
People.
I mean, it was wrong. And, you know, and people people assume where there's smoke, there's fire.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and there was people that I'd known a long time who were podcasters, stuff like that. They're like, I don't know about this Tether thing, you know, and it became very fashionable to say that like Tether was shady. Tether's going to be the next big blow up. Tether's going to be the biggest financial thing that happens is Enron or whatever. I mean, people are saying all this. So we did secure in May of that 2017, before all of this started happening, you know, we did secure auditors. Okay. And by the way, this was after the hack that occurred, and we managed to pay everybody back, or they converted to equity. And then by spring of 2017, we were in the black again. We had that whole story. I think it's the professional thing that you asked me what I'm proud of, or the thing I'm most proud of in my career is engineering that rehabilitation scheme.
Recovery post-hack.
The recovery. That is the thing that gives me the greatest amount of professional pride.
Makes sense to me.
You know, sure, Tether, yeah, it's cool. Most profitable business in the history of mankind, whatever. But, you know, I haven't been there in a while.
It sounds like the hardest thing that you ever tried to do.
It's the hardest, but it was just the most, it was just...
And it was the right thing to do.
It was the right thing to do, but also with everything in retrospect, with all the hindsight, there was not a decision that I would have made differently, or that, you know, and these decisions were made together with Giancarlo, myself, and Stu Hogner, our counsel, and, you know, obviously, really just three of us, and Paolo, but, there was really nothing we would have done differently. And we've seen lots of bankruptcies since then.
Wow.
I mean, think about...
It could have been so easy to just go bankrupt.
Mt. Gox is still in receivership. You know, it's been almost 12 years and they still haven't distributed the Bitcoin.
Wow.
You know, we were not going to be that company.
How long was that entire cycle from the hack to kind of making everyone effectively whole?
August 2nd was the hack. The day I knew everyone was whole is when the final subscription agreements for equity, because we were changing the conversion price on March 31st of 2017.
Okay.
So 8 months.
So less than, wow.
Funny story about that. So we had incentives that we created around converting to equity. So like if you convert, and it was at 120 million pre-money valuation, and people are like, your can't be worth that. I'm like, I don't know. I think even with that, I mean, we got the exchange back up and running in 8 days. Okay, that was crucially important. Okay, we had a couple of other problems. I mean, BitGo was a bit of a problem for us. You know, and I'm happy to shit talk Mike Belshie as well. And maybe we'll get to that too. But
we might need to do a part 2, Phil.
You know, I'd be happy to. I'd be happy to. I mean,
I'm ready. Next time.
I'm at the point where I don't have anybody to impress.
Let's make this a docu-series, Phil. Let's go.
People have told me I need to write a book, but I'm not a book writer. But I think the thing that was amusing about it, so we had all this, it all worked out. And then it was like literally we were getting subscription agreements, and like it's like a Friday night, you know, the stuff, people like still sending stuff into Stu at like 11:30 at night, right? We were clear about the midnight deadline, right? And then Saturday morning, computing everything, looking at the data, and I'm like, we can extinguish the debt. We can extinguish the last of the BFX tokens. We're done. And I was like this. I'm writing up a whole press release, this, that, and the other. I'm about to send it out, and I realized I can't send it out because it's April 1st.
Oh,
I'm like, it's just. You can't
do it.
I can't do it.
You need another 24 hours.
So I waited till Monday, April 3rd to send it out because I'm just like, yeah. It's just.
But that's wild. $72 million effectively at the time hacked and essentially restored in 8 months. That's something.
It was about 30 million of that. I forget what the. Was actually in cash proceeds paid back because we got the exchange back up and running, and we were back as volume leader by that October.
Wow.
Okay.
Interesting.
So, and then Bitcoin,
which I think says something about. You say, maybe this was later after the FUD machine, et cetera. But you say it was fashionable to FUD us. You guys have still and have always had this sort of dominant reputation, an incredibly strong reputation amongst Bitcoiners, I think.
I think that there are a lot of people who still come up to me, who introduce themselves to me, and just like, oh, I just want, oh yeah, they'll tell me what their trader handle was, right? Like from TeamSpeak days, or I'm like, oh yeah, I remember you, and they're like, I just want to tell you that I know I gave you a lot of shit about what you guys did at Bitfinex and how you haircut me, even though I didn't have any Bitcoin there. I'm like, yeah, but it's like, it was trust me, it was just the least of all evils, there was no good choice. There was just the least bad choice, right? But after all the shit that went down with every other company that fucking went under, that didn't make people whole, didn't even try to make people whole. They just go run to the receiver, go run to the bankruptcy court, and then just let somebody else take care of it, And maybe a couple of people ended up in jail, but they were just like it. I back then I was pissed, but in retrospect, after getting fucked with Genesis, getting fucked over here, getting fucked over there, pardon all the F-bombs, but they're like, we realize now that the way you guys handled it, it's like
was the best possible situation.
Erik Voorhees likes to say, he says this to other people. He's like, someone should write a business case, a Harvard Business School case study about how to do a roll your own, bankruptcy.
Well, and it required some kind of creative new ways of thinking about the tech as well. There was a token involved. There was various interesting ways that this was handled.
There were. There were many components to it. The component that I never expected, though, was Bitcoin would be recovered one day.
How did that happen?
That's a crazy. There's still a lot of unknowns about that. Ilya and Heather were convicted of money laundering, not the hack. They recovered, I think, 80% of the Bitcoin. It's still sitting there. It's tied up in very complex court actions around people who gets the Bitcoin. Does it belong to the customers that lost the Bitcoin and got haircutted?
Right.
It's like, well, though we gave you dollars, but we didn't ask for dollars. Or does it belong to Bitfinex? Or Bitfinex is like, well, Bitfinex sold those and they created the Leo token where they say 80% of any, if that money ever comes back, goes to the Leo token holders. Which the moment that hack was, the recovery was announced, I think they jumped up 800%.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, I bet.
There's so much lore here, but it's crazy. I remember my chef came to me. She's like, "Did you hear this story about they caught these hackers?" Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I know about, I heard about the hackers, right? and she's like, they're my neighbors. I'm like, what? And then this is what immediately what I thought, like, so that's how they got. I was like, I'm the weak link.
Oh.
I must have gotten socially engineered or something. Because we still, to this day, we're not really quite sure
what happened,
how it happened. We're not quite sure. At least I have not been made privy to how it happened. So I've always, wondered, like, well, how? Who was there? I have to believe there had to be some type of social engineering type thing. There was a weak human involved.
When did this information
but then
surface?
I realized, well, I only hired her a couple of years ago, and the hack was like,
oh yeah,
I'm like, oh yeah, the timeline's all wrong. It's just a really weird coincidence. She's like, it's so much money. I'm like, yeah, that was my exchange. And she's like, what? I'm like, yeah. She's like, no. I'm like, yeah, small fucking world.
Wait, so to kind of wrap up, we should do a part 2. We should maybe do a series, Phil. I'll get back to you on that. But you left eventually. You did leave. And I'm curious, like, was it everyone else seemed to stay, right? The other leadership folks stayed involved. For the most part, you were kind of the main C-suite person who kind of stepped down.
I was the second largest shareholder. I was a very, very large shareholder of both Tether and Bitfinex. I was the only American on the cap table.
Mm-hmm.
And because of the capricious nature of how the U.S. government chose to basically forced my hand.
Too risky.
It was too risky to continue. It was too risky for me personally, and it was too risky for Bitfinex to have a insider that the government could get to.
Interesting. So you felt that it was actually a risk to the company itself for you to stay?
It was most certainly a risk to the company itself. It was a risk to me personally. It was a risk to, the other thing too is that, like, look, we had, there was like a life-changing settlement, like it was like, I have no.
Right, you walked away in great shape.
No complaints.
Yeah.
And I think that.
It was fine.
It was fine. It's hard to walk away from your baby, Was
that a group decision or was it your decision?
I think it was I think that if I didn't want to sell my equity, I probably did have to, but I maybe just couldn't be involved in, like, some of the inner exec. Look, I was a key daily decision maker. It was really.
It was your idea.
Giancarlo and I who ran the firm. Like, we ran the firm day to day. That's what we did. And I loved being partners with him. He was.
Sounds like you had great relationships with both of them.
I did. I did. And I wish them, really, I'm so happy for their success, and they have really proven the world wrong about Tether, right? At the end of the day, money was all there, In
our part 2, I'd also like to get into all of the things that have happened with Tether since you left. Just the changing narratives, remittances. There's so much.
There's a lot.
There's so much. Yeah.
Happy to chat about all of it. So yeah, but
I'm in, Phil. Let's do it. But that is something that I wanted to make sure that I asked you. That does feel like an appropriate kind of pause, at least for the moment. Was that a kind of legal concern that really?
Oh,
drew you out of it.
You're so. Yeah, it was just one of those things that, like, Giancarlo and the rest of the team just felt very strongly that they had to just pivot away from the United States entirely, which meant they
could have not safe to do business.
No nexus to the U.S. at all.
Did they bring it up? or did you bring it up?
Well, no, that was basically Jean-Carl had felt that way for a long time. I had argued that what we should be doing is we should be doing what appeared to be a good strategy, like Binance.us, FTX.us. Is like, we should form a U.S. subsidiary. We need boots on the ground. We need to have there's jobs in America. When you're just a foreign interloper, regulators will not give you a fair shake. But this time in 2017, 2018, it's like, if you've got jobs, you appear legitimate, you're on site, maybe we can get a crack at it. We'll go get a bit license. We'll go whatever. And they just didn't want to do it. And Giancarlo, I think, was probably right that we will never get a fair shake in the United States.
Do you think, and again, we'll dive into this in our part 2, but is that changing now with the Genius Act? I mean, do you think that if you were in that situation today, would it be a different environment?
Yes. But, I mean, I've been waiting 6-7 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a while.
It's been a while. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, they threaded the needle, Sure, paid off a lot of blood money to regulators I mean, Letitia James, oh my goodness, it's just shakedowns. There's nothing of substance in any of these settlements, but scoring.
That's a lot of stress to live with.
It was a lot of stress. It was a lot of stress. Even after I left, I mean, I am still involved. I'm still connected at the hip with my old Tether partners on this, being sued for $1.4 trillion in a class action lawsuit.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's the most ridiculous case on the planet. I can't believe this hasn't been dismissed yet. This is coming. This is pre-COVID era.
Still dealing with the ramifications.
I mean, people
of this,
because based on the idea that Tether was fake, and the Bitfinex ran up. We ran up the price of Bitcoin from up to $20,000 in 2017 with fake Tether, and then we sold all the Bitcoin for real dollars and drove the price down to $3,000. And they come up with $1.4 trillion by integrating under the curve of the price, over time and volume. I mean, it's like the most asinine. And the fact that this is the 14 defendants, millions and millions and millions of dollars spent on defending a deleterious lawsuit. So still I'm involved.
Is there something specific that you're most proud of in terms of how you navigated all of this?
This is a very rare interview. Okay. I'm very proud of the fact that I know how to keep a low profile. Keep my head down. Too many people in my industry gravitate towards self-aggrandizing behavior. Everybody wants to be noticed. Everybody wants praise. Everyone wants to be the keynote speaker. They all want followers on Twitter. Everyone is so obsessed with wanting praise and wanting to be noticed and this, that, and the other. And I have to say, and I'll probably say this to everybody, you will realize this when you're older. You will begin to really value your privacy, especially when you have children. And I just realized it's like, you know what? I keep my head down. People who know me know me. People, I'm very active. I'm a very active investor. But I don't need to, I don't need to remind everyone of my accomplishments. It's just, I don't, I'm doing this podcast as a favor to you. And, I haven't done one of these in a long time. And the opportunity for long form is great. I do think there's interesting stories to tell. And, I'm happy to name names. Enough time has passed. But
I know this interview, because I do believe the last one you did was that Peter McCormick interview, which I listened to in preparation for this.
Yeah.
That was in 2019, I believe.
Sounds about right.
Which was, now we're coming up on 7 years. And
that's amazing to me. It's that long ago.
And I will say, this is different than that was.
Yeah.
You were much more guarded in that one than this one.
Well, there was still a lot going on.
In 2019. It was pretty fresh. I mean, it was, you had
I'm still like, under like, I mean, I had the IRS criminal division investigating me for 3 years.
Yeah, you had said in the interview, basically, there were multiple points where you're like,
years,
I can't talk about
I spent $1.3 million just trying to explain to them that every friggin' penny is accounted for. I'm like, you got the wrong guy. I am the guy who is, I am the to the T accounting guy. I freak out if my books if I'm off by a penny. I'm like sub-penny rounding error somewhere, like I, when it comes to this stuff, like, sure, I'm very efficient with my taxes and I'm really good at it. It's definitely one of my superpowers, but I did nothing wrong. And they went back so far. They looked under every rock, everything. And part of it is they just didn't even understand what they're looking at. 3 years. I'm not going to get that money back. And by the way, I'm lucky I have the resource to do that.
Yeah.
What about all the people that don't have the resource to do it? That is unjust.
Yeah.
Unjust. And it is terrible that U.S. agencies that have endless budgets can just go after people. And what do? They roll over. And then by way of doing that, they create precedent for the next person. It is a broken system. It is unjust. I don't know how you fix it except to maybe, have some kind of thing where if the government sues you and they lose and they pay your legal fees or something like that, because the little guy can't get screwed here. It's just unjust.
Should do an entire episode on the injustices of the various systems that I feel like.
There's, I've many opinions on many subjects. So anyway, but thank you.
Thank you so much, Phil. This was really quite special interview, and I'm excited to hopefully do more at some point if you're open to it.
I am open. So
this is a great little studio that we're in, right?
Good spot.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but thank you so much, Phil, and what a great story. You're a great storyteller. Thank you.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. Thank you. But the pleasure's been mine.